Hello students, welcome back to second installment of New Experience and Flip Lessons. Today we are going to be, in this lesson, we're going to be talking about employment and unemployment as a measure that we're going to be using in the macroeconomy. I just wanted to preface this instructional piece by letting all the students know that this is in addition to all the work that you're supposed to be doing. I would highly recommend that you continue to read your chapter readings that have been assigned to you, especially since I'm not able to cover everything in class and online. You may miss something that is important when it comes time to take the AP exam. Also, be sure that you check the links, come back to these and work on some of these yourself. Watch the videos. Feel free to watch the videos more than once, or fast forward, move around to where you think it's best going to help you. And remember that the more you do with this, the easier class is going to be next time we get together. So, with all that covered, let's continue with our discussion of macroeconomics by moving on to discuss unemployment. There are certain words, key terms that you're going to need to understand before we get into this whole discussion of unemployment and how it all works out in a macroeconomy. Population, labor force, civilian labor force, and labor force participation rate. Excuse me. We'll first start with the term population. Population is, again, something that you have to be careful of because obviously it's constantly changing over time. And based on the estimates that we have for October 2006, the United States population was about 300 million people. That number is higher, obviously, in 2011 and 2012, based on the last census that was taken in 2010. Pretty sure we're close to about 315 or so, maybe even 320 million people living in the United States currently. But for the purposes of the, discussion and understanding definitions of population, we're going to be fine with using 2006 numbers. Let's keep going and talk about what population is. It's illegal and legal immigration. And we take that population, 300,000. Well, where do we get our labor force from? Labor force is calculated by looking at the total number of people in a specific economy. These are people who are actually willing to work. And when we're talking about the typical labor force, we need to be sure that we understand the difference between civilian labor force and non-civilian labor force. Civilian labor force in the United States is the total number of employed and unemployed persons that is adjusted by season. You can understand that unemployment has to be adjusted, especially seasonally, because during Christmas time, for instance, and right before Christmas, after Thanksgiving, Black Friday is a huge shopping event, opens up the shopping season. A lot of stores will hire a lot more people to work seasonally to take on this onslaught of customer consumption. We can't really take that for what it is in the big picture and scheme of things because it's not the norm for the entire year, and that's why we need to seasonally adjust accordingly. In 2005, actually 5%, and then this number is obviously higher in 2011 of the civilian labor force. We were estimating in 2006 151, almost 152 million people in the civilian labor force are those people who are employed plus individuals who are unemployed. And you can see the numbers at the bottom there between the two because we're looking at the total civilian labor force. Okay. We also need to understand labor force participation rate. This is a proportion. Okay, And what's interesting is that they use the term non-institutionalized civilian population. And we're also looking at people that are 16 years of age and over. So if there are people between the ages, somewhere, I don't know, when I first got my job, I was 13. My first working job, I was 13 years old. Didn't do very much, didn't work very long hours, and didn't make very much, but I was working. I wasn't counted in this because I was 13. So if you're working right now and you happen not to be 16 years old, you're not counted in the civilian labor force. We take a look at this rate. We take the number of people who are in the civilian labor force to figure out what this labor force rate is, divided by the number of people of working age. Okay, so that be clear, it is not everyone. When we talk about what a labor force is, and when we talk about employment and unemployment, we got to be really specific as to what we're dealing with, because not every person in the United States is counted in these calculations. Another thing that comes up in the discussion about this is the non-institutionalization or non-institutionalized civilian population. We'll get to that in a second. Get the labor force rate, you take the civilian labor force and divide that number by the number of working age individuals, and that'll give you your participation rate. You can see these two numbers clearly, which is about 66.2% using these numbers. You can also take a look at this labor force participation rate over time on the vertical axes compared to the years on the horizontal axes from 1960 up to and including 2005 in this graph. Obviously, labor force participation rate is very much talked about in the news and by economic analysis and analysts. We need to understand, though, what the labor force participation rate really does for us to be able to discuss it intelligently.